continue today, we're going to cover Apollyon 20XX through 2000XX. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that. The chapter 1, which was available to anybody who registered to the Kickstarter, Indiegogo, before it started. So this particular chapter is widely available. I do have the full book with me, and it was provided to me by the creator for review. But I'm only reviewing the part that is publicly available. I don't want to go into spoilers or into anything that nobody would have seen before. And it would allow me to give some details as to what I think about this particular project, which is, I have reservations about. I'll be honest about it. There's things that I'm not 100% sure about, both on the technical standpoint and on everything else. But it has some interesting concepts. I'm sorry, I've got a cold. It kind of hit me right after my Battletech video dropped this week. So I might sound congested or might sound weird on this video. I just want to make sure that I keep the production going, basically. As with any good first part of a story, we're going to have to introduce quite a few characters. And here, that's probably going to be a fairly long section because there's a lot of them to introduce. We're going to start not exactly in chronological order, but in order pretty much as we see them in the book, with Oksana Vidovich, who's a child super soldier, product of the old Russian regime, of the USSR. What you're going to see with all the characters that they were all augmented using a thing called Imperimetal. In her case, she was augmented with Imperimetal A in her art, and it basically improves her blood supply, which gives her general super attributes. Super speed, super strength, super resistance, super senses. Everything where your blood is required, it's going to be a little bit better. Another thing you're going to notice as we go through those characters, well, they're all not the most imaginative characters ever. Here, yeah, we're basically dealing with Black Widow. The second character we meet is Colt Bryant, who's an improved laborer prototype. Used to be North American in origin. His arms are augmented with Imperimetal B, and it allows him to turn them into any shapes that he wants, in order to do all sorts of fun things. So basically, he's Warblades from Wildcats. We then meet Chuni Aurora, who's a child assassin that was sold to a terrorist cell, who has a tongue which is enhanced with Imperimetal B, which allows her to have supersonic screams. So it's Black Canary. We are then introduced to Zi Chen, who's a Chinese super soldier developed by their CRISPR program. Not exactly sure what time frame he was enhanced in, but what he was enhanced with is a spine fused with Imperimetal, which apparently allows him to control electricity, which is pretty useful and pretty powerful. So he's basically static, but he's Chinese rather than African American. WDXL, aka Lucky, a name that is given to him later on in the story, is our enhanced super dogs, which has a bunch of augmentations that are not tested on humans. He's basically an hybrid of Imperimetal C and a dog, and gives them general super everything. Seems to be fairly intelligent on top of it. Okay, for this one I had to dig a little bit and say that it's like Buck from Alpha Dogs, which we've covered earlier, but okay, that one I had to go into trenches for the same joke. The last of the first bunch of characters we're introduced to is Maria Cordero, who's a walking chemical weapon developed by the CIA in order to trap people. Her glands are enhanced with Imperimetal C, which allows her to use pheromones to control people. And if you haven't guessed, well, it's basically Poison Ivy. Last but not least is actually the first character we meet, but is the last character we really get to know, is Xero, who's a telepath and the guy that gets the team together and out of prison. His brain and skull has been augmented with Imperimetal C, which gives him mind-altering powers towards those who have been close to Imperimetal. He also seems to have telepathy with people that are touched by Imperimetal, which is pretty useful. So he's basically Professor X, but he can walk. I might sound a little bit mean with those, it's basically at the end of every one of those characters. But in the end, that's unfortunately what it feels like when we go through a lot of those superhero comics. There's very little imaginations left and very little character archetypes left. And sometimes it does hurt a comic when things are too on the nose or too simplistic at the same time. We begin the story as Xero is leading the others through a prison break from the outside using his telepathic powers. He's pretty much woken them up and is directing them through his instructions. First one to get out is Oksana, and she breaks out, kills a few of the guards after stealing a weapon, more than likely, and she goes on to free the next one, who's called Bryant. He blocks a couple of bullets with his arms and then kills one of the guards, and then uses his arms as a sledgehammer to bust open a wall, and this frees Chuni, who uses her voice to shake the foundation of the building, knocking out some of the power. This allows Xi to be released, and he busts the rest of the electrical grid with his electric powers. This releases Lucky, who goes and tears through some of the guards in order to release Maria, and everybody meets at the center of the courtyard to be bailed out, and Maria uses her pheromones to cause some of the guards to kill each others. While all this is going on, Xero shows up in a gunship and pulls out all of the escapees to safety. Not 100% sure why they discard the gunship, because it looks like a fairly decent piece of hardware, but that's how it is. After landing, some of the others have some question, and they start interrogating Xero, who introduces himself and start explaining the history of the Order, who is our group of bad guys for this story. It all starts in the 19th century as Imperimetal falls to Earth from the stars, and it starts being used in pretty much every single bit of technology that humanity uses. This is also what is used to improve all of our heroes. The Order, which is basically composed of the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet, start using Imperimetal, their money, and their power to try to get global control over everyone. Their end goal is basically to use someone infused with Imperimetal in order to take over everybody that has been in contact with it, which is pretty much every single human on the planet at this point. We learned that Xero's brother, Negative, is the one that they're planning on putting on the machine to do just that, because he's also got similar telepathic powers, but he's got less of a self-preservation desire, I guess. And Xero's goal is to basically rescue or destroy him. The other do start questioning Xero even more, wondering if he's actually telling the truth and everything. And Xero actually goes into detail of his escape plan, and we learned that the plan was built around a very small margin of error and margin of success, and that a lot of people were also, tortured and experimented on. Gives us a lot of details as to why the Order is a really bad group of dudes. We also learned that each of the members that were rescued were part of extremist ideologies in the past. Well, we had a member of the Red Guard, basically. Colt's father was a white supremacist. Xi Chen was a member of the Chinese government, or was basically sold to the Chinese government. Chuni was literally sold to a terrorist organization, etc. After all this is done, the escapees and Xero basically decide to join forces to fight the Order and try to make sure that humanity remains free. And this is basically how this chapter ends. The story is fairly interesting, and there's a good setup here for the world building and the characters. I do have some reservations. We'll go over that as we go through the review. But there's nothing here that is out of the ordinary or that breaks immersion. It works really well as a first story or as an introduction to our characters and our concepts. And I'm not surprised it actually works, because it's a setup that is tried and true. The cover for this is our very basic headshot cover with the head of every single member of the cast. And there's not much to say about this one outside. There's a whole bunch of characters in this, and it doesn't tell us much of anything else outside, that one guy that looks like that ninja from G.I. Joe and Chrome Dome. So it almost feels like a G.I. Joe comics from the looks of it. Not a terrible cover, mind you, and it's perfectly functional, but it is on the weaker end of things as far as covers go. The branding for Apollyon is pretty good, but it's not the most imaginative either. It simply works, and this cover, if I saw that in a store, would probably move some units. I got this as a pre-release PDF, and honestly, it's really lightweight, something like 30 megabyte for a 200 and some odd page book. So it's fairly lightweight, and the quality is still pretty good, which is very nice in my opinion. An important thing to note, though, the copy that I got was not fully edited, not completed. Some parts were weird and had weird typos and stuff. That happens. It was also told to me by the creator when they sent me that copy. But the whole thing is still cohesive and readable, so it's not the end of the world, and I expect a few of those things to be corrected for the release version. One thing I have to say, though, is that I'm not a fan of the white on black palette that they go with the entire book. It is very oppressive, so I know it works with the theme of the story, but outside of a PDF, I'm not sure how great it's going to look, because paper is paper, and paper is not black. And if you use black paper with white ink, I'm not quite sure how it's going to come out. And I'm not sure if it's going to work all that well either. I mean, the quality of the paper you're going to have to use for this book is going to have to be top quality, or it's just going to be a complete mess, in my opinion. Since I have a digital copy, I'm not too worried about that, but physical copies might have some issues. Each of the chapters in this book do have a cool title card, and they work really well, in my opinion, so that's a very good start. One thing I do not like is that this is being called the Godfo universe, but this is your first book in the list. You shouldn't start with a thing like the whatever verse as soon as you start a story or a series. This is a thing that you earn by creating content and having people actually follow it and read it. Even the whole Ripaverse thing, in the end, is a thing that I find a bit over the top. It worked in this case because there was a lot of enthusiasm for the ISOM and the different books in the Ripaverse, but in most situations, I don't think it's going to end as well. You might notice that my voice is a little bit different. I'm recording this on a different day where I am a little bit less congested, a lot easier for me to work. So here, when we look at the art style, it's a little bit odd. It's different from what we're usually used to, but it's a style that I actually enjoy because it's got a lot of life to it, both in the art itself and in the movements of the characters. It is cartoony and exaggerated for a lot of things, but it's not too cartoony. It's not at the same level as, let's say, something Donald DeLay would be doing. And it's not too realistic either. It really straddles that fine line between the two, while keeping its own identity. One thing you will notice is that the art during the info dump is actually a step up from the rest of the art in the chapter, and it's a lot more realistic, which gives us a nice separation here in this is what's being described to our characters, while the rest is what is going on with our characters. Not sure if that was the original plan here, but it does work really well. Our random security guards do have a fairly nice definition to them. Their armors are complex enough. They look like full-on body armors, and they've got enough, details on them that they are interesting. And their faces are just different enough to not make them completely faceless grunts. The two guards we've got here have different facial features and different features in general, which is not a thing we've been seeing in, let's say, some of the recent DC stuff, as an example. The gunship that comes to pick up our hero is really, really good, but I do feel that it's very reminiscent of the Star Wars Republic gunship from Episode 2 and Episode 3. That's not really a bad thing because it's a good design and it's a functional one, but some people might see it as a little bit uninspired. Lucky looks really good for a cyborg superdog, and I personally think it's a little bit more interesting as a mutant creature than what we see in alpha dogs, as an example. It just has a little bit more presence to it. One thing I can decry, though, is that the backgrounds in this particular book are an afterthought. Or even worse than that, they're completely forgotten. You don't see backgrounds most of the times. For some of the artists, like this one possibly, AI backgrounds will be a massive boon and will help some creators make things look better on the paper. It's a thing that is worth considering, especially if you're producing large books like this one. The usage of black and white in here is a little bit better than what we see in a lot of modern mangas, just because we have a lot more nuance to it. We've got a lot of gray tones that you don't see in some of those modern mangas, or at least not as much. It's also better than the Frank Miller super negative space thing we also see a lot of people do. So it's a nice mix of the two. In one way, this is something that doesn't look super polished and professional, and that's what makes me like it a little bit more in the end once I think about it. It does remind me a lot of the good old time where everything was hand-drawn and everything had to be composited manually in a way. This makes it just that little step up in terms of realism, I guess, but not realism in the drawing. It feels more real, like something that was out of someone's hands rather than out of a computer. We are once again playing in the mysterious world of Cabal Secret Society, a world-ending conspiracies. This is a thing we've been very used to recently when you read comics, and it's because it's a simple mean for our brain to wrap itself around how horrible the world actually is. It's basically what we use to keep ourselves sane most of the time. Because if you start looking at actual secret societies, mysterious cabals and such, you'll notice that they're actually quite incompetent as soon as you start digging. So it's not as good for our mind when we realize that. One of the issues I see, though, is that I feel that the stakes are way too high right from the start. I understand the idea here, and it is good in theory, but here it really feels rushed when we're dealing with new characters and new concepts. Once again, I'll go to Hybrids by Luke Stone for something that's a little bit better. While we're dealing with world-ending situations in Hybrid as well, it starts as a very simple, well, let's try to rescue a few people story, and then it escalates over time. While I do feel the way this was set up as a staggered character introduction is probably the best way to do it in this kind of story, we are dealing with way too many characters in a way too short of a time frame. We'll go back to Hybrids here, Sons of the Gods. It's better introducing one character at a time and escalating over time and over time, with more and more characters being introduced and we learning about them over time rather than that huge dump right at the start. It has its advantages, it has its inconvenience, but I think as a reader and as a writer as well, I think it would be better to do it in a more constrained way. Doom Patrol also introduced a lot of characters at once, but in this case they went with 4. 3 where we get the big story and the chief, where we only get like a very basic introduction of who he is. And for each of those characters, we did get enough page room to let us know who they were and what their background was. One thing I do like here is that the diverse characters do make perfect sense in this particular story. And it fits the theme that we have here with the people being exploited and all walks of life. And it gives them a common background, even though they're all very different. It's also nice that the leader of the Xero team has a direct connection with their main bad guy. And it does have a kind of a story where he needs to rescue or stop him, which is better than just, well, here's the big bad guy, we need to defeat him. It has a bit more depth in that regards. We do have a nice tension between the characters as well. A lot of them don't trust Xero. Xi is very headstrong, same with Colt Bryant. We've got Maria that's happy-go-lucky and ready to go with just about anything. But even there, you can feel that she gets on everybody's nerves just a little bit. It's not the same as, let's say, the, well, first run of the Doom Patrol, but it's close enough that it gives, once again, enough depth to the characters. All of the characters are given their time to shine through this story. It's just revealed as well as how much Xero looked for people to help him. And it was not just luck and fate that brought them together, but actual planning and actual skills. So it's very interesting to have at least a little bit more research on the characters. It's also nice to have a nice anti-fanatism message throughout the chapter, with everybody having been exploited by fanatics in the past. And it's something that more people should take heed on, especially in the very difficult political climate where we are. This is truly a first chapter that goes at breakneck speed. There's very little time to breathe and very little time to let the situation sit here because there's so much to actually give as far as exposition goes. The thing is, it does work as far as exposition goes because it does set up all of our characters. We've got enough information on them that we can understand them and their powers. And we get a good chunk of information on the setting. And all of that is, well, coherent enough in 36 pages that it is easy to go through and actually tell the story if someone asks you what is going on. It did succeed at it, and it doesn't feel too much like a tell, don't show situation, because we've got a prison break, which is packed with action, and the world building dump is actually framed in a way that is engaging to the reader. This is a book that is financing right now, so if this is interesting to you, now this is a good time to get into this project. Might not be the most imaginative or forward-thinking book in existence, but for what it does it fairly well, and it is enough to get you interested in what is going on. And it might very well be worth your time and your money, especially since there's, like with most new campaigns, a very basic digital package, which works just fine. I do understand that with how many books and projects and things that are out there, and with many creators having a fairly hard time, it might not be the best time for you to, back a project or go into something new. But this is a thing that I would sort of recommend. It's probably not the greatest book in existence. It's not going to change your life or your outlook on art, but there's a lot of good ideas behind it. Writing is actually fairly interesting. Sometimes we just need to finance and help some of these projects that show a lot of potential. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I hope you had a very nice rest of your day. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. I will see you guys later. Keep on reading comics. Keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing and analyzing them. Bye-bye.